Alright, welcome back to the Razor Crest series, and now we need to make our environment look a lot nicer. So in the previous one, we just had some basic block out of where we wanted geometry to go, but now we need to actually make that into proper geometry. Now for this, I am using some third-party assets. You will need to find your own for this, but this is hopefully going to give you an idea of how you can begin to make your environment look a lot better. We're also going to be going over V-Ray displacement, so if you're here just for displacement, check the chapter links and you can skip ahead to that section. All right, let's get started. Okay, so at this point, what we need to do is start to set up the scene to make it look just a little bit more like the end result. So instead of using this kind of crappy cylinder, we are going to replace this with actual assets, like some rock and cliff assets. All right, so the first thing that we need to do here is either template or reference this placeholder geometry. And we can do that by creating a new layer. And this is a display layer, not a render layer. And then selecting either the template, which is this, or you can click it again for reference. What that's going to do is still going to be visible in the scene, but you're not going to be able to click on it. And this is going to be a useful guide when we start placing our proper rock assets. Now, speaking of some rock assets, the ones that I use for this were available on CG Trader. They were paid, but they are very good. So if you're interested in using the same ones, these are the ones I used. If you're not interested in this one, there are quite a few other ones on CG Trader. There's also Turbo Squid, and you can find similar types of assets. You could even go for ones that are not a collection, but are just singular assets and then copy them out. Another really popular choice is Quixel Megascans. So on this site, if we just type in cliff and go to 3D assets, nature, rock, cliff, and there's quite a few very good assets that you could use. Now to use Quixel Megascans for Maya, it does cost money. It's not free like the Unreal one. So if you're interested in that, I would highly recommend that. Otherwise, just keep some placeholder geometry until you have some assets that you think would be usable for it. You can also model this yourself in Maya or go into ZBrush or however you like to do it. And perhaps you don't even want a cliff. Perhaps you want to do something different, right? So that's up to you. You could even do this on an open plane. The rest of the concepts of this course are going to be the same. It doesn't really matter what the background is, because you're still going to be able to apply all the skills and knowledge to be able to do this for whatever scene you like, okay? Right, so hopefully in the future, I will be able to provide you with my own assets. I just don't have the ability to do that right now. In terms of the photo scanned aspect of this, I don't really have any that I can give you, and I don't really have any time to make them. They are quite intensive. But it's something I would like to do in the future, especially for some other ideas I have for content for this YouTube. But yeah, just go and check out these if you are interested. As I said, this is the one that I'm using, and I'll put a link in the description. All right, so whatever you choose to use as your environment, make sure you download it, put it inside the assets folder. Make sure the textures are in the source images folder, and then we can go back to Maya. To access those, we're going to go to File, Import. Now you can reference these if you want to, but I know for sure that we're never going to be changing these rocks. Whereas the Razor Crest, at some point, I might give you a different model, or you might want to use a different model, like you might want to use a different ship or something like that. So let's go to Import for this. Then we're going to go to Assets. We can import this first Cliff OBJ object. And all of these objects came in really small, something we should have talked about, which is setting your scale up properly. The Razor Crest, though, never really had a scale that when we imported it, I don't believe. So everything is going to be pretty small. So if we just created, let's say, a box here, this is 1 centimeter. So going however many meters that is across, I think that's actually way too small for what we need. Something we should have addressed, but kind of forgot about that. Regardless, though, these objects also come in small, so we can just scale everything up. We're just going to place a few of these around here. So I'm just going to move this one over here. I'm going to import object number 2. Drag that out. And then number 3. We also have some rocks as well, just regular rocks. And these actually come in pretty small. One thing I am going to just do here, just to clean this up, I'm going to select my Razor Crest create a new layer for that. I'll just type in Razor Crest for that display layer and then turn off the visibility just so we're not constantly looking at it. So we can scale these up, do what we want with them, but basically we want to create a shape that kind of goes around this perimeter here. But before that, let's actually assign some materials. I'm not going to show you all of these, but I'll show you just the first one and then you can do the rest yourself. So we're going to select the Cliff 1 mesh, right click, assign new material, V-Ray MTL. Let's call this Cliff 01 matte. On the diffuse color, I'm going to grab a file. I'm going to load in the Cliff 1 albedo. And if we turn on our textures here, you can see this kind of update. So we got some nice textures there. For the reflection color, crank that up to 1. For the reflection glossiness, this is actually going to be roughness. We need to change that, but we're going to load in the roughness. Oops, Cliff 1 roughness. Color space, we're going to do utility raw. And then we absolutely have to change this to be use roughness, otherwise our rocks are going to be super shiny. For the normal map, we need to change the type from bump to normal and tangent space. And then for the map, we're going to grab Cliff 01 normal, color space. Now this one, it is important that it is raw and it's not sRGB color, so that's important. All right, so what you need to do before we get too far into this, go ahead and texture all the rest, and then we'll finish up placing our assets. So now I've got all of those textured there. This collection also comes with like a bonus map or just gravel. So I'm just going to create a new plane here. I'm going to add a new material for this. Let's call this gravel. But the gravel one's going to be really useful for us. We're going to grab that. Use roughness. And then lastly, for the normal map, one thing that I wanted to show you here is that every time that we make a change, like we say, hey, this is raw, but then we say reload, it changes back to sRGB. So you can always click ignore color space file rules, but then you have to do that on every single node. So I want to show you how you can do this globally with a color space file rule. If you go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, go into Color Management. I spoke in one of the previous lectures about what a rule is, or that you could create a rule, and rules set up what the color space is going to be. So let me just show you an example, and let me add a rule here, and we'll call this normal. So for normal maps. And for normal maps, anything that has the word normal in it, what we want to do is say automatically change it so it's raw. Well, for the image extension, this could be for literally any type of file, so we could just say anything. That's what the little asterisk is. And then to say normal, we would simply type in normal. So this means that your texture has to have normal spelled like this somewhere in the name. And if you do it like with 2 asterisks, it's anywhere in the file path that says normal, it would automatically be changed. Now the problem is though, that this might be a lowercase normal, but on the Razor Crest, it could be a capital N. So if we go back to source images, RC textures, and have a look, these are capital N's for normal. So that's kind of a problem. So instead what we want to do is do this notation. So we would do bracket, and then we'd say like N, then capital N, close bracket, normal. So this means any file that has either lowercase or uppercase that has a normal in it, that's going to look for both of those. Kind of an odd syntax, but that's just the way it is. And then what we do for the input color space, we would say, hey, this is going to be raw. and then you say reapply rules to scene, and notice what's going to change here with the color space. Changes to raw. So now if I change this to a different file, like I do, let's say I accidentally put displacement in there, changes to sRGB. Right, then I go back to Gravel and I say Gravel tileable, automatically gets changed to raw. That's useful. You can set these up for anything that you want to, so you could do roughness or displacement or anything. So it's a useful thing to do. We could quickly do one for roughness. No roughness, any type of image, lowercase r, capital R, roughness. Now you do need to be kind of careful with this because sometimes you may not have actually named the file what you thought you named it. So this does say roughness, but if you said rough, well, that's not the same thing because it's not going to find it. So you can set this up so it's like anything that has rough in it would be tagged, but it's an odd syntax, I will say that, and you do have to look it up. Maya does have a page on that if you're interested. Now the input color space for this would be raw. And then we're good to go. So then we just say reapply rules to scene. And now if we go back to the gravel mat, reflection roughness, it's changed there. If I try to change it back, it will change. But if I reload it, it'll get reset. Okay. This is a useful thing. I should have probably shown you that in the previous video, but something that will probably be useful as you progress throughout the course. I wanted to show you some quick texture tricks on this. So obviously if we increase the size of this, our UVs are completely wrong. So probably the easiest thing basically to do, because we have several channels, so if we go back to the hypershade here and we graph this, we have roughness, normal, and albedo. I don't know why albedo is all the way down there. Looks cleaner like that. But we have 3 maps and we have 3 of these texture nodes. Well, on the texture nodes, it's very convenient to do something like this, where we say, hey, repeat. You could say 4 by 4, for example. That will just repeat. We'll just tile that texture 4 by 4. But then we'd have to do it again on this one. We'd have to do it on this placement node and this placement node. And I want to show you displacement in a minute, and it would have to be done on the displacement as well. So that's really convoluted and not particularly useful. All right, so this is Lyndon from the future, looking at what I'm about to show you and thinking, why on earth did I show you that way? So what I'm about to show you still technically works, and it is a really quick, hacky solution that requires pretty much no effort. But I wanted to show you quickly some other things that are probably better practice and give you a bit more control. So first of all here, anytime that you have multiple maps and they each have a separate placement node, that's potentially problematic, because if you go to one placement node and then you do the repeats, let's say we're doing 4 and 4, well, now you're going to have to remember to do that here and here. What I show in the video, you can just grab one of these nodes, attach them like this. That is perfectly fine, but you're still losing all the other operations here. So instead, let's just delete 2 of them. We can also delete these. And if you hold down the Control key and then middle mouse click and drag the orange circle into the white circle, it automatically will create the default connections. So now you have a single placement node that's affecting all 3 texture maps. All right, so that's one way. Second thing that's useful is the UVW randomizer. So if I click tab, just type in UVW, grab the UVW randomizer. So what this does, it will take tiled images and then randomly rotate them. So all we need to do, we can continue to use this placement node. If we click on these little bars here, we can grab the input, take the out UVs, slap it in there, delete the original placement node for the UVW randomizer because we're using ours. And then you can click it one more time and we can take the out UVs and plug them into the UV coordinates of our texture nodes. And what that's going to do is going to automatically do some randomization. If you turn on this stochastic tiling right here, I would like to do another video on this. I don't want to get too far into stochastic tiling. I'm sure other people have also done videos on the UVW randomizer. Really useful. I made one a while back for a custom solution for Redshift, but this is a pretty good solution for V-Ray. All right, so let me quickly show you this in action. So this is what we've got currently. Let me just hide the Razor Crest so we can see this better. We can see there's a noticeable tiled pattern. This is either by expanding the scale of the UVs or just repeating them. And next, if we middle mouse click and drag this onto our plane, now you can see that that pattern is completely gone. So if we zoom in here, there's no discernible pattern with the stochastic tiling on. Just remember though, with the UVW randomizer, if you don't turn on your stochastic tiling, you'll still get a pretty noticeable grid. So you want to make sure that that is turned on, right? Just wanted to show you that because when I recorded these lectures, that's going back to over 6 or 7 months ago, I didn't know about the UVW randomizer, but it is a pretty useful node. So this is probably a lot better than what I show you in the next part here. But based on our camera angle, it's not really important and we're not going to notice any tiling. But if you move your camera down and you pull back a bit, you will probably notice tiling. So I would recommend this workflow if you are looking for a quick solution for doing some randomization. Just remember to turn on stochastic tiling. So now we're going to go back to the original lecture and I'm going to show you a technique that does not require modifying the placement node. So what we can do something like this. On the placement texture, we can just take one of them as reference and then plug the UVs into all of them. And then when we select the gravel tileable, for example, and then we go to the texture node 17, you can see, hey, look, been added. And then we select this one, and then we can see, hey, texture 17 has been, placement node 17 has been added, and it's 4x4. Same thing on this one. It's been added. But the problem with doing that is if we add displacement, you have to remember to do that. It's fine to do, but if you like that method, I'm going to reattach these though, because I think the majority of you don't care about that and would rather just do it with the UV editor because you're probably more familiar with that. So that's what we're going to do, and that's fine. So I'm going to put this back. This is really useful though if you already have everything UV'd and you can't change your UVs, all right? If you wanted to have something that kind of went over the top of your existing UVs and just tiled the specific texture over it, this is very useful to remember that these repeat UV nodes and offsets and mirrors and everything exist. So instead, we're just going to go and just do this kind of a cheap way in the UV editor and simply just take our UVs and we'll just make them way bigger. Really cheap to do that. Not something you can do for like a lot of game stuff or something where you have to have specific texture sets, but that's a really easy way to do it there. The UV tiling though is pretty cool. There's also other things called triplanar, which it's just going to automatically like box map it for you, which is pretty useful. But what I want to show you now though is displacement. So this looks fine, but if we get really close, we can see that it's just going to be like a plane. It's not going to look like it has any roughness at all. And I think I may have made that a little bit too small, but so I might need to make that just a little bit smaller here. We can still really see where that tiling is, but we don't need to walk around this environment. We're only going to be seeing a specific angle. All right, so displacement. There are two ways to do displacement with V-Ray. One is on the shader level, and one of them is on the object level. The one on the object level tends to give you a lot more control and is more useful, but it's really finicky, like how you get there. So I want to show you that. So you go up to Create, V-Ray, then you go down to V-Ray Displacement, then you say Apply Single V-Ray Displacement Node to Selection. So select that. And then we can delete the history of this, say delete history. And then you can see there's a V-Ray Displacement node that's been added, and then it gives you a material. So if we select the input connection to that, we really don't want a material, we just want a texture. We'll say texture, back to the file there, and then for the image name, we'll say rock textures, gravel tileable displace. Color space would be raw, and then we're good to go. So you'll never see anything in the viewport change, but if we go to the viewport IPR and turn that on, you'll be able to see there's now rocks added, which looks pretty cool. Sweet. So if you wanted to change the amount of displacement, you can then select your plane, go to Attributes, V-Ray, Displacement Control. And then here, if you open up your extra V-Ray attributes, you can change stuff like the displacement amount. So if you say 0, it's going to be completely flat. So you can kind of see the difference here. That doesn't look good at all. Now this looks pretty good. Like all that detail is already done for us. Now we do have some issues around here that looks pretty bad, but we're not going to worry too much about that. So we're not going to get super close to this, but it's going to be okay. We could increase the displacement, do something like 2. For this, I think it looks pretty good. If you had the camera zoomed back really far and you just really couldn't see the displacement otherwise, you could increase that. So as you can see here, there's a lot of tiling going on, which doesn't look great. It would be really cool if there was just a texture class here at the college that we could really go into a lot of things that you can do to quickly make textures not tileable. Something I really enjoy and something that I think a lot of you would benefit from, but unfortunately, we don't really have that time to get so lost and sidetracked on that. But for this, I don't think it's going to be a problem because the camera is going to be so low. The next part is you just want to basically place these assets where you think that they should go. You can add as many as you want and you can make them look as you want. And you want to keep the camera kind of, you want to reference where the camera is so you can see how these things are looking. Like some of these like this cliff here, it looks pretty good because it has a nice slope, but these don't really have much of a slope and they're kind of open there. So basically you just need to place these assets where you think that they would look good, and you can have some overlap, and I don't think you're really going to notice if there's a lot of overlap. You just want to make sure that there's no planes that are casting a shadow or lights coming through them. We probably want to set this one back a little bit, something more like that. And on this one, we might want to make this a little bit bigger. We might want to pull both of these forward. We'll pull this one out, that. Maybe make this one a little bit bigger, like this. But this is basically how you do a lot of asset placement. And I'm sure if you've done the game art class, I've never taken a class like that, but I'm assuming you're doing stuff like this. It's pretty common type of industry thing. But we're just going to reuse these assets a bunch of times, kind of place them over any of the gaps and rotate them around so they're not as, it's not as apparent that we're using them over and over and over again, but stuff like that. And we actually might want to pull all of these in a little bit. I think we've added quite a bit of excess space that we don't really need around here. We could definitely pull those in. And then we can start to copy these elements over. And we kind of just want to go around that perimeter that we created earlier with that sphere. So this might look a little bit more square-like, and that's okay. It doesn't really matter for this. If it looks too dark later on, we can make some adjustments, but we do want to have reflections on the ship. So it is important that we do surround this area, even though that we can't see what's behind the camera. We do want the reflections on the ship. So it's important that we're going to have something there. I probably didn't need to worry about that gap at all. So this is something that you could blend with an HDR if you wanted to go that route and not have to worry about having all this excess geometry loaded and saved in your scene. And again, this might be a really useful thing to use referencing for, because we could just reference the same object over and over and over again instead of having that in the scene. But I just want to show you different techniques so you can, you can choose what you want to do. So sometimes when I'm going through these in my head, I'll realize like halfway through the lecture, I should have shown you a different way of doing it. There's a lot of right ways to do things. Also, definitely wrong ways to do them as well, but I think in this case, it doesn't really matter. Now, here we have a little bit of a problem, and that is that we don't actually want this cylinder to be here. So what I want to do in this case, I want to select all of this except the sun. I don't want that. I don't want the cylinder or the camera. I'd like to have this just in a group. So we can do Control G or Edit Group. We can just call this Rocks. And for the rocks, Just pull this up. And here's another really useful thing. If your pivot point is off screen, the last axis that you used, so in this case, it's the y-axis, you can be completely off screen. You can't even see where that gizmo is. You can just middle mouse and click and drag that up. And it's automatically going to remember that was the last axis you used. It's a little random bit of Maya trivia. And delete that cylinder. I don't need it anymore. And then let's go back to our camera. I'm going to go turn the Razor Crest layer back on, display layer. These are not render layers, they're just display layers. Have this come in. And I think that's going to look pretty interesting. Let's see how the entire scene looks. So this is a problem. I think we're getting way too close to some of these rocks over here. We're going to need to make the scale way smaller. Some gaps over here that we need to deal with. That might be as simple as just simply pulling down that a little bit. So I'm just middle mouse clicking, dragging that down to close that gap. But this right here, the plane, that is a problem. So we're going to go back to the UV editor. And then I'm going to make this even bigger. I kind of wish we'd stuck with the tiled one, the tiled method, because I think that would have been a lot better to do. But I'm kind of committed now. I don't want to go back and redo all of that just for the sake of making that a little bit more tidy. So on this plane again, we can actually just call this ground. And then on the attribute editor, V-Ray displacement, let's lower that displacement down by half. You can see what that looks like, maybe by another half, something more like that. That's more reasonable. I think that's going to look better. It also doesn't look like there's a lot of clearance at the other side of this cave, or this kind of rocky section. So I'm going to get out of that, and then, yeah, we've gone way too far with this. So now we can just pull that way back. And we could rotate this around. We can do whatever we want with the environment. We want some of those rocks closer, we can do that. If we wanted to even scale everything down a little bit, we could probably do that too. We want to have that a little bit tighter. But I think for the most part, this is going to look okay. Yeah, that looks okay for like some rough work. This is all going to be out of focus, so we don't need to worry about the stretching right there. It's going to be fine. If it was a problem, we could change it later, but we can always play around with the V-Ray displacement. I think in this case, I'm actually going to increase that back up just a little bit, so it's a little bit more bumpy, a bit more rocky. And then we could even grab assets like this and then decide, hey, I want to move a copy of that closer, just so we have something in the foreground. I'm going to turn on my resolution gate there just so I can see that a little bit more clearly of what's going on. We could try playing around with some rocks. These might be a little bit large though. And we could actually change this. We could actually lower some of this terrain here if we wanted to. We could kind of make this come down a little bit. We want to be careful that we don't lower where the gear is supposed to go. But these are things that you could do later if you wanted. Like we could actually lower some of these vertices down, give it a little bit more of a slope. Or over here, we could raise some of these up, just so it's not super flat. Some of them over here, like 3 for the smooth shading, just to add some variation. I think I might actually want to make all of those cliffs even taller as well, so we see them at the very beginning. So yeah, this is never ending. You could keep tweaking this forever, but I think we are in a good state. I do want to change one thing with the camera though. I want to zoom out just a little bit. And it looks like we have quite a few keyframes here that we don't need. So remember to delete unused keyframes, you can go to edit, delete by type static channels, first of all, to remove anything that's not moving. The rotation looks like it changes slightly here, perhaps on the camera. Let's go into the graph editor though, and then just have a look. Like that doesn't do anything. It's this keyframe, we can just delete that. And then right here, maybe I just want to pull this out just a tad. And then maybe these rocks, I don't want them. I don't know exactly what to do with these rocks yet. I'll just put them right here. We might decide to use some pebbles later. Okay, I just don't want to crowd it too much. And then on some of these cliffs, we wanted to make these a little bit taller. It looks like the pivot point is at the bottom. So in all of these, could probably stretch these up just a little bit, just to the point where we could see just a little bit of them sticking up here. It's probably not stretched too much that it would be a problem. Cool. All right, let's save this and then we'll begin the next part.